Hey everyone, welcome. In this video, I'm going to continue where I left off for week 9, talking about the box model, but I'm going to introduce the properties for padding, borders, margins, and border radius, maybe a few others. So remember, our content sits in the center between our opening tag and our closing tag, and then outside of that we have padding and margins and borders. And even though we can't put colors into padding and margins, we can affect their size. We'll start with padding. Padding is that space, again, that sits between the content and whether or not we have a border. That border is optional, but padding is extremely useful when we want to give our content a little bit of breathing space. In previous demos and exercises, you might have seen some text kind of crowded up against the edge, but we're going to fix that. Let's open up that week 9 demo folder for box model. And I don't need this image anymore, but I do want to bring up my HTML and my CSS and go ahead and open my preview. We won't need the HTML very much, so I'm going to minimize the amount of space that it's taking up in order to focus more on my CSS. Now when it comes to the property for padding, we can specify or target all 4 sides of our padding, whether it's on the top, the bottom, the right, or the left. Let me write this out. We have padding that we can put on the top, on the right, on the bottom, and on the left. But one of the things that I want to stress, that I can't stress enough, is that we don't want to have to write out 4 lines of code for something that one will take care of. So we use shortcut properties every chance we can get. If I want to apply a style to all 4 sides of my padding, I could write it out in this manner. But better yet, I could just say, I want to put padding on the top, right, bottom, left. So 1em on the top, 1.5 on the right, 1 on the bottom, and 1.5 on the left. With the padding shortcut, we can take that padding property and pass in 4 values. Now the caveat to this is we have to pass them in just the right manner. In this case, we want to start on the top of our element, go to the right, the bottom, and the left. We're working in a clockwise format. So when it comes to using padding shortcut, we have options. We can pass in all 4 sides, like I've just done. We can pass in 3 sides if the right and the left are the same size. Notice that my top and my bottom are 1em, my right and my left are the same, 1.5. Using the 3 values, we would do top, right and left, and bottom. That's a little bit of a time saver, but we can cut this down even more. We can pass in just 2 values because our top and our bottom in this case are the same. We can say padding, 1em for the top and bottom, 1.5em for the left and the right. And if all 4 sides were going to be exactly the same, we could just say padding is 1em. Now to help us to remember this, the book has some really awesome ways to think about it. They use an acronym called TROUBLE. This is to help us remember which sides go first and in what order when we're using our padding shortcut, starting with top, going to the right, the bottom, and then the left. So you'll notice when you put it all together, you get that acronym for TROUBLE. TRBL, top, right, bottom, left. When we're passing in 3 values, it's the top, right, and left, and the bottom. When we're passing in 2 values, it's the top and the bottom, and it's the right and the left. And when we're just passing in 1 value, it's all 4 of them exactly the same. Top, right, bottom, left. Always, always, always use shortcut properties whenever you can. All right, with that in mind, let's go ahead and add some code. Let's scroll through our CSS. And let's take a look at our preview. Notice how down here in our footer and up top here in our navigation, there really isn't a whole lot of breathing room between the content and the edges. Let's add padding to both of those elements. Now you can see in my CSS that I already have a selector for nav and footer at the same time. This is a grouped selector, so I'm just going to add my property value pair to the one that's out there. I'll use that shortcut property to say padding, and then I'll pass in 2 values. 1.5em. This is referring to the top and the bottom, and notice how immediately in my preview it added 1.5ems to my navigation. And if we could scroll down at the bottom, we would see the same thing in our footer. Well, we don't really want to have 1.5 on all 4 sides. We only want it on the top and the bottom. So for our second side, or our right and our left measurement, we're going to just use the number 0. Now one thing, when we're using 0, we don't need to specify what unit of measurement we're using. 0 is 0, no matter if you're using ems or pixels or inches, it's just 0. So when you have a 0 entered in, just leave it that way. Already, that looks better. Let's see what else we can do. How about down here in my hours? This is all squished up on the left-hand side. Let's add some padding to this element as well. It looks like that's our aside element in the HTML. And I already have an aside selector used in my CSS, so I'll add to it. I'll just add padding, and I'll pass in a top and a bottom of 1.5 em. And let's put some padding on the left and the right side. We'll put 2.5 em. That looks better, but I think we can do a little bit more. Look how our main element, all of that content is also squished up on that left-hand side. Let's add padding around our main element as well. I already have one that's out here. I'll just add to it. How about 1.5 em on all 4 sides? Let's talk about the next one, borders. Now borders are optional, and when we use borders, we're putting it around our padding, if we have any specified. Remember that image where our padding was around our content and then our border was around our padding? Keep that in mind while we look at some different borders. I'll again minimize my HTML. And just like with padding, we have ways to shortcut how much we're going to write for code for our borders. I'm going to toggle this closed for just a moment. A border has 3 values that we need to know. What is the width, what is the style, and what is the color? And for every element, we have 4 sides, a top, right, bottom, and left. Which means if we want to specify the width, the color, and the style, we need to know if we're going to target a particular side, all sides, or just a couple of sides. There's 8 different types of border styles. There's dotted, dashed, solid, double, groove, ridge, inset, and outset. If you count none as a style, then I guess there's 9. But out of all of those styles, we typically use just one on an element. We don't have to though. So for example, what if my property wanted to have a top, right, bottom, and left style all be different? I could have a solid, dashed, ridge, double border. I don't have to write it this way. I can target them individually just by saying border style and then passing in my 4 values. And just like before with padding, we're always going to go top, right, bottom, left. So solid, dashed, ridge, double. And similar to our styles, we can do the same thing with our size, where we're specifying the top, right, bottom, and left. Don't want to write out 4 lines of code? That's okay. You can just write out 1 and shortcut. Your border width on the top and the bottom is 0.5 em, left and right, 0.2 em. And that third value, how about that border color? This should look pretty familiar. Top, right, bottom, left. We can specify 4 different colors. Or just write 1 line for border color, passing in our 4 values. Usually we don't style our borders with different colors, styles, and widths on all 4 sides. And thankfully, we have a shortcut property that can take a width, a style, and a color all at once. For example, let's add a border around our main element. I'm going to scroll down to the main, and I'll add a border. Now it doesn't matter if I go width, style, color, or style, color, width. It doesn't matter which order I put them in. I just need to have a width, a style, and a color most of the time. There are some times when you don't need to use a color if you're going to inherit the color from above. But let's say we're going to use a color. Let's put in a solid 2-pixel green border. It's hard to see, especially on the left-hand side of our preview, but you can definitely see it down at the bottom and the right. That's because our border is squished up against the edge. We'll fix that later. But let's add some more borders. How about a border to our H3 element? So in the HTML, one of the H3s is this muffins. We'll surround this with a 4-pixel border, and we'll make it double. Now I haven't put a color in, but notice that it already picked a color to apply. It's pulling that color from the H3. Now currently there's a color on the H3, but if there wasn't, it would just inherit that color from the next value up. We don't have to use that color if we don't want to. Okay, let's add a dashed border to the bottom of all of our links inside of the main element, but we only want to have this happen when we hover them. We're going to have to create a new rule to do this, because I do see that we have a main element, but not one for the anchors in the main element on hover, and while we have one for the navigation on hover, that won't cover what we're looking to do. So in our main, any anchor element on hover needs to have a border on the bottom. We'll go with a 2-pixel dashed. And I won't pass in a color, I'm going to let that inherit. Now when we hover on our links in the main element, we can see that appear. It's still kind of a little bit tight to our element though, so let's use some padding on the bottom to push it down just a little bit. Now I can either say padding on the bottom, and then pass in 1 value, or I can say padding and set all of my sides different. So on the top, we're not going to have any padding. On the right and the left, we're not going to have any padding. And on the bottom, we're just going to have a little bit of padding. But notice now when I hover, and only when I hover, that padding gets introduced, and it's not affecting any other content on our page, meaning it doesn't push anything else down around on our page. While we're talking about borders, let's talk about border radius. Because you can round the corners on a border with the border radius property. I'm going to include this with the border shortcut. Now this is a little bit different. When we're talking about rounding the corners, there are two corners on the top of our element, a top left and a top right, and there's two on the bottom, a bottom right and a bottom left, which means we won't be able to say top right, bottom left. We have to be a little bit more specific. We have to say top left, top right, and this should actually be bottom right and bottom left. Because we're still going to go in that clockwise format, but this time we're just going to start on the top left and work our way around. Let's add a border radius to our main element, but I want to target all four sides with the same amount, so I'll use a shortcut of just border radius and pass in one value. I'll say 1m, and I'm going to apply that to our main element. Notice how the bottom right and left corners are now rounded? We'll do the same thing to the top right and top left borders of our aside element. I'll scroll this up so you can see it, and I'll scroll up my preview. First, I'm going to target all four sides at once, and I'm going to darken the background color just temporarily so that you can see this take effect. Okay, the color may not be pretty, but I think it'll help us to visually see what's about to happen. Just like with any other shortcut property that we have, we can target the individual sides. But because we can't use the same exact top right, bottom left, it looks a little bit different. I'll make it a larger radius to make it more obvious. When we pass in two values for our border radius, if I say 1m, I'm referring to the top left and the bottom right. And when I say 5m, it targets top right and the bottom left. So individual values that we used before are a little bit different when it comes to the border radius shortcut. Just keep that in mind when you're using the shortcut properties. Let's set this back the way it was. And let's move on to margins. The margin is that optional space that you add on the outside of the border. In a previous video, I showed how the browser's user agent style sheet automatically adds margins to some elements, but we can add our own. And just like the padding property, let me scroll up. I'll toggle this one closed and then reopen padding, because just like this padding, you can do the exact same thing with margin. Just replace the word padding with margin, where you can target the top, right, bottom, and left all at once, or you can target 3 sides, 2 sides, or just one side. You can even set margins to 0 to remove any default margins around the body element. We don't need to do this though because we set our margin to 0 before, but we can add a margin around our main element, and that'll help us to see that green border that we applied earlier. Let's go ahead and scroll down and add a 2m margin all the way around the main. So notice it's on the outside of the border, and now we get to see all of the content in the main element away from the edges. Now I have just 2 more things I'm going to cover real quick. I want to talk about the display property and the box shadow property. Because the display property, we know that elements are either going to be block level or inline, but they don't have to be because we can change the element's type using the display property. Let's go up and look at those navigation links in our preview. And I want to look at our HTML. I'm also going to line up the CSS so we can see all of this in one line. Alright, on the far side left we have navigation, in the center we have our selector, and then on the right hand side you can see the actual display. They appear on one line because the anchor element is an inline element. We could add break elements after each one of those inside of our HTML to force them to break to a new line, or we can just change the anchor element to behave like a block level element. To do that, we're going to add display block. And automatically, without having to modify our HTML, we've changed the visible behavior of our navigation. When it comes to the display property, it can get a little tricky, so it's best to play around with it and try different things and see how it visually affects the elements as they render on the page, as well as what it does to the rest of your code. Now the last one I promised to show is the box shadow property. And just like text, we can apply a drop shadow to the visible elements of our box, and that includes the margin. It'll take the same property values as the text shadow property that we did before. I'm going to close out our HTML because we're done with that for this video. And I'm going to focus on our header element. Keep an eye on the header element in our preview pane. I'm going to add a box shadow. And just like with the text shadow property, I have to pass in an X position, a Y position, a blur, and a color. So let's say we're going to use 0.2M, a 0.5, and the color gray. And it may not look that great, but now it's going to be up to you to play around with it and see what you can make it do. Find ways to make improvements to the header as a side challenge. Now that's all I have for you in this video, but if you have any questions on this content, please don't hesitate to ask.